Hey guys, it's Ollie from Rad Season. Welcome back to the Rad Season Show. I'm super excited to be joined today by journalist and fellow podcaster Shelby Stanger. Shelby, thanks for coming on the show. How are you?
I'm so excited to be here, and the fact that you're in Portugal where we want to live is even better.
Yeah, so how come you've been thinking about Portugal?
Well, we've lived in New Zealand, we've lived in Costa Rica, and I really haven't spent much time in Europe. And I can only speak a little bit of Spanish, but there's surf there, and it seems like it's a really beautiful place. And just, I don't know, being in Europe so close to so many other places sounds amazing. And I heard it's like still affordable, and
It is. I mean, I've been here like coming up to 2 years, and it's amazing. I mean, I sort of moved over for the waves, and kind of surfing was one of the main draw cards to come here. We're close to Lisbon, but you sort of got surf on the west coast, and then on the south as well, sort of closer to the city, and yeah, some good mountain biking as well. It's like sort of 15-20 minutes away from all these like cool hills to go mountain biking. So
it's awesome. And just like a place with land and like culture, it seems to have it all.
Yeah, that's it. And you're over in California.
So I'm in San Diego, right? Yeah, in a town called Solana Beach. So if you've heard of Encinitas or La Jolla, I'm in between Encinitas and La Jolla in this cool little beach community. It's getting ridiculously expensive, but it's quaint. And we live on this cliff. We live in a condo complex. It's on a cliff with access to the beach. And so it tends to be very uncrowded where I live. Whereas like every beach next door is very crowded. The wave's very average though. So you get what you pay for, but I love it. And I was just telling you, we're having a couple of sharks coming in, which has been really exciting because it makes surfing a completely different sport. Our whole life, I haven't had to worry about sharks. And people are saying, oh, well, there's more footage and there's drones. But no, we're seeing them with the naked eye come up out of the water and breach. And you can see the belly, which they're bright white. There's no other animal that has like a bright white belly. And then they flop in this fashion that is not like a dolphin. So I've seen 2 in the last month breach. In my whole 41 years of living, I've never seen one before.
And how far out? Like,
well,
kind of close to the lineup, or is it like swimming around?
Saturday was 50 yards, and it was a small one. And my girlfriend was like, "Oh, it's just a juvenile, no worries." And I was like, "Yeah, I could still kind of mess you up." But a couple of weeks ago, I saw one that was quite large, but it was, a couple 100 yards away. I screamed like a little girl, paddled right back to the beach, and everybody just kind of laughed and stayed out surfing. So joke was on me, I guess. I mean, luckily there has not been an attack for many, many years. There was an attack years ago, and it was actually in my hometown of Solana Beach. Really sad. A triathlete was out swimming, and, a shark took a bite out of him, and unfortunately he died. This is a great way to start a podcast. But so sharks are in the water.
I know that freaked me out. Like I was in Australia for about 7 years, and that was sort of one of the things where I don't know. I'm from the UK, and we're not really used to sharks.
Yeah, we're just not used to it. Yeah, and I'm trying to be more aware of it. I mean, sharks are, this is their home. We're just surfing in it.
And where did surfing begin for you? When was that at high school or?
No, I was really lucky. I grew up in Cardiff by the Sea, which was a town of a lot of surfers, and my teacher was actually Rob Machado's mom. And I just worshipped Rob and wore boys gotcha. There was no such thing as women's Roxy. You had to wear like guys' clothes. And I thought it looked so cool. My parents are from the East Coast. My dad was a dentist, and he grew up in New York. And my mom is from Pittsburgh. And they didn't know anything about surfing. They didn't even go to the beach. And I just loved it. And I really wanted to be a surfer. It looked fun. It looked freeing. So I begged them to take me to the beach, and they would take me boogie boarding. So I would try to stand up on my boogie board. And my dad, I think he would have been supportive, but girls just didn't surf. So he didn't really get it. And he ended up passing away suddenly of a heart attack when I was 11. And it was a total bummer. But that summer, my sister got me a surfboard for my birthday. I turned 12. And it's like, I just realized this year that board had been buckled. It's still on my rack. So someone sold her a buckled board that had been glued back together. It was like 6 foot. I couldn't stand on it barely, but I loved it. I slept with it in my bed, and I tried to teach myself to surf. And then I went to surf camp every summer. And I had all these great instructors. And then one week I had this female instructor, and all the guys liked her, and she spoke fluent French and Spanish, and she taught SAT classes. She had gone to UCSD. And so we convinced my mom to let her be my babysitter when she went out of town. And so she'd go out of town. My mom would go out of town. She was a single mom at the time. And this woman, Izzy T. Hani, would like throw ragers at my house and was a great babysitter. And she ended up starting an all-woman surf school called Surf Diva years later.
Oh, okay.
And so I started teaching at Surf Diva from the age of 15 or 16. I'd say I'm like probably better at pushing people into waves than I am at surfing myself, but I love surfing. And I think as a little kid, when I was 11, learning to surf, especially after my dad died, I think in surfing, it's just such a good sport for a kid, and you get a lot of answers that you can never get on land. You learn humility, you learn patience, you learn joy for joy's sake. And I grew up in a family of overachievers where you like had to work really hard. And I just found surfing fun and freeing, and it ruined my life and saved my life, I think, many times. I think a lot of my decisions have been based around surfing. And I even met, my partner for life while teaching surfing in Costa Rica. He was out there, and I just thought he was really cute. I paddled out one morning before I was teaching lessons, and he happened to have been living in San Diego. And so I just kept taking his waves. There was only like 4, there was so many waves to be had, but we just thought he was cute. So I kept taking his waves, and then eventually he talked to me. And it worked.
And when did you go over there? Was that sort of like before college or?
Oh, no. So this was many years later. So this was actually when I was 29 years old, and I should have been really responsible. But I just quit my job at Vans at the height of the recession in 2009 to be a journalist. And everybody's like, you're absolutely crazy. I had a great job at Vans. It didn't make a lot of sense on paper, but I wanted to be a storyteller. And at that point, that meant telling stories through magazine articles. And a friend of mine, Izzy from Surf Diva, was like, why don't you go to Costa Rica and teach surf lessons? Like, you have this time in your life where you can do it. And I was like, that seems so irresponsible. I went to this good college. I was trying to make it as a journalist. And at that time, that meant pitching magazines and working your tail off to get clips. Mm-hmm. And eventually she convinced me to do it. And I was able to work for companies while I was living in Costa Rica. I had an early version of Skype, and I just thought it was like such a genius invention. I could tell people that the monkeys overhead were like freeway noise. And I just thought I was so clever. It's like not everybody knew I was in Costa Rica while I was working. But I taught surfing, and then I was able to consult and write articles from there.
Nice one. And with the writing, I mean, was that something that you were like passionate about when you were younger? Like, because you studied journalism, didn't you, when you were at university?
Yeah.
And that was sort of like.
Yeah, when I was young, I was a really good writer. I'm trying to do a writing project now, and I was like, God, I was much better when I was younger. And I also don't love staring at screens, but I love how writing makes me feel. And I love telling stories. And back then, the only way, there wasn't podcasting. So how we told stories was through writing. And when I was little, I was a pretty good writer. I had parents my mom was a college professor. So like I learned to read and write young. I'm also the youngest of 3 girls. So they, my sisters were kind of nerdy. So they got me into reading and writing young. And because I was told I was a good writer, I thought I was a good writer. When I was 15, I won an essay contest for the local newspaper, the San Diego Union Tribune. And I got my first article in print. And it was really cool. And the teacher said, hey, you'll get extra credit if you enter. And if you win, you get an automatic A. And I was like, awesome. And I won. And I didn't think I'd win, but I won. And then the next year, I wrote for a magazine that my sister had found. She was at Stanford, and she went and did a study abroad in Washington, D.C., in the capital of the United States. And while she was there, she met these girls starting a magazine for kids and by kids. And I became a youth reporter, and I wrote about some serious topics. My mom taught human behavior, and so I interviewed one of her students who had been date raped. And like that wasn't really talked about then. And it was a pretty heavy story to write at 16. So I wrote that. And then I wrote about a family member's battle with alcoholism. The family member wasn't so stoked I wrote about her story, but I wrote about my perspective in having a family member who was going through it. And kids wrote in and said like, hey, your story affected me. And the biggest thing that happened was I had a soccer teammate. So I was a really big time soccer player. I kind of surfed very averagely. That's not even a word, but I was a diehard soccer player because there was actually kind of a future. At least you could go to college as a woman if you played soccer and, played through college back then. There wasn't really like professional soccer like there is now. And I shared this story with a soccer teammate, and she said, "Hey, Shelby, I shared your story with my boyfriend, and last night he decided he was not going to drink anymore." And I was like, "Whoa, that's awesome." And this was a girl who like partied. I didn't think she really even read. Like, I just thought she just kind of was a bit of a jackass, to be honest. And she really liked my story and it resonated. And I was like, cool, I'm going to be a journalist. So I went to journalism school at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia, and I interned at a ton of newspapers, and I got to work at CNN. And but I really, I covered real stuff like fires and City Hall. And I just always liked covering action sports and surfing. So right out of college, I pitched the LA Times. I'm like, can I be your action sports reporter? And at the time they had nothing like that, but the X Games had started. And the editor-in-chief of the LA Times, he appreciated my enthusiasm and my ability to cold call him and find his number. But he was like, "Shelby, there's no such thing. But you should talk to the PR people who work at Vans." That's kind of how I got connected at Vans.
And then that was kind of your first, I guess, proper job.
Yeah.
Before blogging wasn't even really a thing, right? So you were like the official sort of writer for the Warped Tour.
Yeah. So in 2002, I was the writer for the Warped Tour. It was a blog before it was called blogging, and they called it the Pit Reporter. And honestly, to send my stories every single day, I had to find a phone line, because that's how you sent stories. You sent them through a phone line. There was no such thing as Wi-Fi. Which is like so crazy. So I had to find a phone line, but the Warped Tour is held in dirt there. So for those who don't know, the Warped Tour is the longest punk rock concert series. It went to about 60 cities in 60 days with 108 bands at each stop, along with skateboarders and BMX riders and all these crazy, it's called a punk rock circus because there's a traveling circus of really motley types of people traveling. And I was on a bus with Steve Van Dorn. And he's hilarious. He's like, "Yep, I was on top." Or no, he said I was on top. I don't know. It was really embarrassing when he said that. But Steve Van Dorn at Vans is such a good guy. And I shared a bus with him, and I shared a bunk with Steve. And on the bus was also Christy Van Dorn, who's the daughter. And it was a wonderful, wild summer. But yeah, I had to send these stories in every night. And so finding a phone line at a dirt parking lot or amphitheater where these are held was not easy, because if there was a phone line, it was occupied by someone who was running ticket sales, and you did not want to mess with them. They were really scary, or like one of Kevin Lyman's people, and they were all like so intimidating. I was 21 years old, and this was my first job out of college. So I started trading kids that looked like they wouldn't murder me free Vans shoes or free Vans t-shirts or whatever Steve gave me for the day, so that they would give me a ride to their parents' house or to a nearby Kinko's where I could send it faster. I don't even know how I sent it via Kinko's, but there was some way I could upload it at a Kinko's, and it went way faster than through a dial-up connection.
And was it like a different stop, like every
day.
couple of days, or every day?
So if I didn't make it back to the bus like in time after sending my stories, I would have been stranded in some like Kansas City parking lot before going to the next tour. But the bus never left me, so I ended up doing okay.
And was that just for one? Like that was just
one year. One summer, and I thought about doing it again. And the smell of tour, like smell of a bus, gives me like minor PTSD. Even though it was the summer of my life, I don't think I could ever do that again. There's people who are diehard music roadies, and they tour every summer. That life is not for me, but it was such a wonderful experience. I'm so grateful I had it, especially as my first job out of college, because I had to figure it out. And there was no job description. It was like, write a story. So I ended up writing 2 stories a day and taking a lot of pictures. And I had to figure out what to write. Nobody told me what to write about, but I had a mentor from a magazine who was like, start with the roadies and like the people outside the tour, and then go to the headliners and the biggest bands. And that way you get a full picture. And I thought it was great advice.
And how was it speaking to the bands? Were they pretty open to chat? And
I mean, yeah, they're like,
they're
like punk rock guys, but I try to do unique stories. So there was a guy from Bad Religion named Greg Graffin. He's the lead singer, but he happened to be a professor of theology at Cornell. And I thought that was so fascinating. He taught religion at Cornell. So we did a tour around Canada of a bookstore, and I did summer reading with Greg Graffin, and he shared his favorite books and why. And I tried to be like slightly cerebral about some of the topics. And then other times I totally blew it. Like, I think I started off writing about like the nonprofits, and they were like, come on, give us some juice. And so the second day I was like, fine, you want some juice? And I talked about all the people in the mosh pit and how they got injured and how crazy it was. And all of a sudden the next day I hear the loudspeaker, Shelby Stanger, come to the Warped Tour office. And it was Kevin Lyman, who you talked to a couple of weeks ago. And I basically got reamed for, writing about the craziness that happens on the Warped Tour. My job was also basically PR. It wasn't just journalism. You know what I mean? Like, I was also telling a story about, I probably should not tell you this. Anyways, I'm going to get in trouble by telling you this. But yeah, I mean, I was trying to talk about the Warped Tour, but the positive aspects of the Warped Tour. And there really were not many negative aspects of the Warped Tour, but yeah, it's a concert. Like, in a mosh pit, something might happen. So anyways, lesson learned at a young age.
And then that opened doors up to Vans, right? So when you finished, was that sort of when you thought, that you wanted to try to get more of a sort of full-time corporate job, so to speak, or
No, I did not.
Or did you think like, okay, like you're gonna do something else after that?
I just wanted to write about action sports, and I wanted to write about people, and I wanted to tell stories of other people going for it. So I moved to Breckenridge, Colorado, and I was like, I'm gonna write about snowboarding, and I never spent any time in the snow. And I did. I wrote about snowboarding, and I hosted an entertainment show, and I waited tables, and I worked at a music venue, and I wrote for the newspaper, and I worked for a TV show, and I loved it. And it was a great experience. But at the end of the day, at the end of 2 years, basically, I missed surfing. And so I took a job back in California, and the only job I could get was it was in Orange County, and it was for a company called Pacific Sunwear. They're like a retailer, and I was a content writer. And it was an early content writing job, and it was pretty cool, but it wasn't the same as Vans or the Warped Tour. It was a retail store where not many people surfed, and they sold surfing clothing. And so a friend of mine from Vans was like, hey, they're hiring for girls marketing manager and PR manager. You should apply. And I applied, and I got the gig.
Nice. And like what was that like? Sort of going from, I guess going from writing and then going into more.
Yeah, I didn't
marketing.
have any experience.
You were probably doing PR for the Warped Tour, right?
I think I can do PR really well. I did PR. I feel like I can tell a story and sell a story really easily. That's what I was trained in. Marketing at the time, I didn't have a lot of marketing experience. I probably didn't have a lot of business having that job. And part of my job was to style the photo shoots, and that I'm dressing myself is sometimes a challenge. So I probably wasn't the best person for that job, but I was enthusiastic about the Vans girls' vision. And so I think people liked me. But when they kind of caught on to the fact that like I wasn't that good of like a photo shoot stylist and producer, they moved me. They could have fired me very easily, and they gave me the option to leave. But instead, they promoted me to a better position where I got to work in international sales and marketing. And so for a couple of years, I worked directly with this other guy who was amazing, who went to SC, and he was really brilliant. He's Latin American from Venezuela. And together we reported directly to the president of Vans. And I did international sales and marketing for Australia, Asia, Canada, Mexico, basically all of Latin America.
Nice.
Australia, New Zealand. And it was fantastic. And I loved it. And it was an experience that I couldn't have paid to get in business school. And I loved it. But then at the end of the day, at the end of those couple of years, I really wanted to be telling stories again. And
were you traveling when you were doing that international job as well? Was
traveling,
that kind of going everywhere?
And it was amazing. I got to go all over Latin America, to Australia a bunch of times, to New Zealand, and I loved it. And I was often flying in business class. I mean, I had the dream job. But I started to experience depression. I think partly because depression runs really deep in my family, and I thought as an athlete, I was exempt from it. The other part is that I just felt a little stuck. I felt like, oh, I was supposed to be this journalist, and here I am selling shoes. And that felt really incongruent with my mission statement in life. And I think if I could have worked from home, I probably would have stayed at Vans forever because it was a really good job. But I hated commuting those 2 hours in traffic. It felt like 10 hours of my day were gone to traffic. And that was challenging.
Yeah.
So eventually I got the courage to get help for depression and quit my job. And I put some balls in motion. I started freelancing and I started doing some things on the side. And this is in my early 20s. So like today, would I have done the same thing? Probably not. But actually, this is my late 20s. And I was just figuring things out. I had a lot of energy and I had a lot of success young. And then I was like, I don't know if all this success is what it's cracked up to be. Eventually, I got the courage to quit. And like I said, I'd been freelancing on the side and putting some balls in motion to make the transition back to journalism full time. And literally the day I gave notice, I got a call. And it was from one of the PR women I'd worked with at Vance. And I mentioned, hey, I might be leaving. Think of me if any stories come up that you need a journalist to cover. And she's like, hey, this male journalist backed off of going to this trip to Indonesia that we need covered. There's 5 guys, they're world-class watermen. They're going to stand up these remote waves and go on this famous boat called the Indies Trader. Would you like to go? Nice. And I was like, yeah, I'd like to go. But I mean, I wasn't a very good surfer. I was kind of a desk jockey at the time. Still not a good surfer, but I was a really terrible surfer back then. And I got the gig. So I gave my boss at Vans 2 months of notice because they were so good to me. Like I said, they probably could have fired me much earlier, but I had a really good relationship. I mean, the people at Vans, like, I don't think I realized until now, like we had really, really good camaraderie, and it was a really fun time to work at Vans. The company was just blowing up. We got to do a lot of experimental things that I don't even know if they're allowed to do now, but it's a cool progressive company, and they do a lot for the community. I don't personally wear shoes. So like that was also a hard thing for me. Like I literally walk barefoot everywhere I can or wear sandals. But I gave them 2 months of notice and thanked them profusely. And then I went to Indonesia. At first I went to Indonesia, then came back, got them through the sales meeting. And I think there was like Shelby before going to Indonesia. And then there was this version of me after going on this trip.
Whereabouts in Indonesia was it? Was it in the Mentawais or was it?
So I went to the Mentawais on a boat trip, and Martin Daly, who's this famous boat captain who founded most of the waves in the Mentawais, he was our captain. And there was an actual captain running the boat, but he was like the overseer of the whole thing. Yeah. He was on the trip. He told me amazing stories about his life and the things he found and the waves he discovered. I was also with Brian Keulana, who happens to be one of the most legendary Hawaiian watermen in the world. He's like the modern day Duke Kahuna. He's the guy who is the lead stuntman and stunt coordinator for pretty much any movie ever filmed in Hawaii. And I mean, there's really no better person to be on an island with when you're scared of the waves, because he's sort of like, you know what people think of The Rock? Like people around The Rock, Dwayne Johnson, they feel really safe because he's like this big guy and he feels like he can protect you. Well, Brian Keulana has that same aura. Like he's just this big dude who's so knowledgeable about Hawaiian culture and water culture and the ocean. There wasn't anybody that you could be with that you would feel safer being in the water with than him. And so I flailed in Indonesia. Like I'd been a desk jockey. I'd never surfed an ocean deep water spot in my life. I surfed like beach breaks in San Diego, and that was it.
And even it gets heavy over there, right? I mean, obviously,
it's
like
so
depending
heavy.
On the spot and stuff. But,
and I tell this story a lot, but I'll just tell it to you quickly. Like we were at this spot called, so the whole trip, I'm like playing the I'm just a journalist card. I'm here to write, not surf. But you can only
try to get you out. They're like, come on.
Yeah, and you can only sit on the boat so much, or you get seasick and you get sunburned, which is a good metaphor for life. You got to get off the boat and into the water and actually ride a wave, even if it means getting worked. It's better than going and staying on the beach. It's better than staying on a boat. Actually going and getting work is always better than staying and getting sunburned and seasick. So one day we're at a place called Mutz, which in Aussie slang, Mutz means vagina. And it's like the most sexist name for a spot. I'm already like, oh, this is so obnoxious. And it's not a pussy wave, you know? It's like a heavy wave. I later learned it's called Mutz because it forms a perfect hole, and it's like this beautiful left barrel. But as I'm there, we're sitting at Mutz, and there's this point where Brian and I are the only ones out. And he's like, there's a huge triangle. So the waves there come up shaped like a triangle. They come up with steep slopes on each side versus in San Diego where they come up more like a rainbow and they like break gently. They come up very steep. I'm sure you've seen this, right? Like I had never seen a wave come up like a triangle. And he looks at me and this wave is coming towards us. And he's like, "You gonna go?" And I'm like, I don't want to go, but I don't say anything because he asked it in a way that says, if you don't go, you're going to be sorry. And I just start paddling and I'm scared. And earlier I had asked him, how did you train the actress Kate Bos? So he'd been a stuntman on the movie Blue Crush. And I was like, how did you train Kate Bosworth to surf those big waves in Blue Crush? He's like, oh, that's easy. I took her out to Waimea the first day. And I was like, what? And I don't hear the rest of the story that he only took her in the channel on a jet ski to swim. I'm like thinking that he actually took her so that she surfed 20-foot wave on the first day. And he was like, because if I took her to Waikiki the first day, you know, she would have thought that these like 1-foot waves were her normal. And for the movie, we needed to get her in big surf. So he just made it so that that was her normal. And so as I'm imagining this like dainty actress careening down a 50-foot wave, he's like, you going to go? And I'm like, I better go because Kate Bosworth could do it. I can do it. I have more experience surfing than her. So I start paddling. And then he'd given me one more piece of advice. I had kept falling earlier that week, trying to catch waves and just flailing. I bought a 5'8" surfboard, and I needed like a 6'8" surfboard. I didn't have one. So someone let me borrow their like 6'6" kind of gunny type board. And it was a step up, but it was so helpful because my board was too small. But I kept falling, and he's like, Shelby, just start saying, make it, make it, make it. So long story short, wave is coming. You're going to go. I'm like, yeah. I start paddling, and I keep saying, make it, make it, make it. And oh yeah, so he said one more thing. So every time I fell, I was like, I'm so scared. What happens when I'm underwater? Like, I feel like I'm going to die because I'm just panicking underwater and like I'm going to drown. And he's like, just sing a song. And so first song that came to mind was That'll Be the Day When You Die. And that's like a terrible song to sing when you're being held underwater. So I picked You're My Sunshine. I like changed the song. So I'm paddling for this wave. It's coming. And I'm like, make it, make it, make it. And I start singing You're My Sunshine. I get to my feet, and it's just this beautiful wave that barely goes over my head for a nanosecond. I would call it like a shampoo, not a barrel. And it was like amazing. It was just the most amazing feeling I've ever had in my entire life. First, I've never seen a wave that breaks like that or that goes over your head with crystal clear views of ocean on each side. And I thought everybody else was gone at the boat and no one could see it. And I was kind of bummed at that moment. I'm like, I've been trying to prove to these guys all week long that I can hang, and I clearly can't, but I wish they had seen this one wave. And just then a photographer holds up a camera like this, and he was sitting in the channel the whole time and got this shot.
Oh, nice.
And it looks like I'm getting shacked out of my mind with the worst style, but the biggest smile. And I think that trip changed me. And what's really interesting is I interviewed a man named Mickey Munoz a few years later. And Mickey is a legendary older surfer. And he said that he once came out of the barrel in Indonesia, a similar type of situation. But he said he once came out the other side 10 years younger, that the wave literally changed the cells in his body. And I've been on this binge lately to talk to scientists about the effects of nature on our mental health and on our well-being. And I think there's something to it. Like, I think that's why surfers are so addicted to chasing great waves. Like, I think it's why you have moved to Portugal to be around surf. It's why I could never date a non-surfer. I like failed miserably dating guys who didn't surf and succeeded at dating ones who could, and always needed to live near the ocean. Like, I always just felt happier and more relaxed.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely something like now with everything going on, or just in general, but with being out in nature, and yeah, it's sort of, I don't know.
And the confidence, like I recently interviewed someone for Wild Ideas Worth Living about hiking the Pacific Crest Trail. And she's like, I was a terrible athlete, but every day I hiked, and I'd wake up and I would look from my campsite back to the trail of where I had come from. And I'd come so far. Yeah. And she's like, and doing that over and over and over 45 days, that rewired my brain in a way that I couldn't have had rewired doing anything else. And so I think there's this confidence that you get from doing outdoor sports that you can't get anywhere else. And
like coming back off that boat trip and sort of having that experience, did that then give you the confidence? You're like, okay, like I've got this, I'm going to go out and do my own thing. And
I'd already quit. So it was already in. I was like, okay, I quit. And then I just moved to San Diego, found a place kind of near where I grew up, found a roommate. I had to live with a roommate, which was a little brutal for a while, but he was an entrepreneur. And it was quite a good experience. And then I hustled like a mofo for like 6 years straight, like pitching magazine, pitching journalism stories, getting rejected. But eventually, if you get rejected enough times, you start succeeding. It's funny. I listened to a podcast the other day with Alex Honnold on climbing gold. And he was talking about how a friend of his has this like pain threshold. Like, I forget what it's called, but it's like a pain channel. And he's like, you can either, I'm going to butcher this. My partner can repeat it really well, but he's like, you have this threshold, and on one side is sucking really hard and the other side is working really hard. So you can either have pain by sucking really hard, or you can move the dial the other way and have pain from working really hard. You're going to have pain either way.
Regardless,
you either have pain from sucking or pain from working hard. So I sucked really hard, but I had pain from working so hard. Eventually I didn't suck so bad. So I got really good at pitching stories. And then, in journalism, you can't really make like I had a journalism professor who was like, there's no way you're going to make a living as a freelance journalist. And I wanted to prove him wrong for years. And he was kind of right. Like, it's really hard to make a living as a freelance journalist. Like, you make like a couple $100 a story, you work your ass off. And there's not a big reward at the end of the day, except for inside. There's not a big paycheck. Let's put it that way. So,
were you just doing it around action sports and adventure at that time?
Yeah,
or were you
mostly?
Okay.
Mostly. I'm not really interested in other things. I mean, I told stories about racism, about politics, about all sorts of things, but always through the lens of sports.
Okay.
I've really that's sort of how I view the world and how I relate, mostly through being active. And that's just kind of the lens in which I've chosen to share stories to the world with.
Yeah.
And so I consulted on the side with brands like Nike when they launched a women's fitness line, with Prana. And then I actually went back in house for a couple of years, or for a year or two, with Body Glove. And that was really fun. And I also then was a reporter about the business of the outdoor and action sports world for Shop Eat Surf, which is a B2B site. It was a wild idea started by this woman named Tiffany Montgomery, who was a business reporter, a retail reporter, and a food reporter, which is why it's called Shop Eat Surf, for the Orange County Register. And I was one of her only reporters. And I got to interview, the CEOs and marketing executives of every action and outdoor sports company. So I learned a lot about business.
Yeah.
And I started wanting to have a business of my own. But I didn't want to start a shoe company. I didn't want to start a t-shirt company. There was nothing else I knew besides media. And podcasting had gotten pretty but it started getting popular. And I would always listen to Tim Ferriss's show, and I loved his show. Like, I love Tim Ferriss. He's such a great interviewer. And I loved the format, especially because the whole story exists. When you write an article for a magazine, they cut it. I just written a story about Wim Hof for Outside Magazine, and they cut it. And I really didn't like how they edited it. It was so short, and I had all these amazing quotes and amazing interviews. And I spelled someone's name wrong, and I didn't even fact check it. And I was like so bummed. And I was like, this is so frustrating. All this work for like a really small reward. And then I was like, somebody was like, you should start your own podcast. And I didn't think I had the chops to do it, but I took an entrepreneurship accelerator course where day one, I had to write my business plan. And the last day, which was the 90th day of the class, I had to present my business to a team of investors, which meant I had to have the podcast built in 90 days. And that was the best thing I'd ever done and spent my money on. Kind of a long story telling you, but I'm also writing about this right now. So I'm like testing out some material.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so were you thinking, like, when you were doing that accelerator course, you're like, okay, like the podcast is going to be around adventure?
Yeah, I knew exactly what I wanted to write. I just was like, no one. So basically, I loved Tim Ferriss's podcast, but I left out this part. But I wish that he had interviewed more adventurers and athletes. He interviewed mostly like people in tech and high achievers and business. And I think, business people are interesting, but I'm more interested in athletes, especially athletes who do alternative sports, like action and outdoor sports. And no one was doing it. And I kind of couldn't believe it. I was like, how are none of the magazines doing it? But they weren't. They just weren't set up. They didn't have they couldn't figure it out. And I was like, I know how to sell. I know how to market. I know how to do interviews really well. That was probably what I was best at when I did journalism. I was probably a much better interviewer than a writer. And I was uniquely qualified, I thought, to be a podcast host myself. It took me, a little bit of time getting over imposter syndrome, but I did it. I didn't have any tech skills and I didn't have business skills in terms of having ever run my own business. Like I'd run marketing channels and sales channels, but never my own full business. And it's scary when you have your own business. Like everything is on you. It's like if someone makes a mistake, it's your fault. When you work in a big company, you can blame hundreds of other people. And you're also working on someone else's dime. So your expense reports are big. When it's your money paying for everything, you have so much skin in the game. The stakes for failing are so much higher. And I liked that. It felt like I was really living. And I was creating something that I really thought we needed in the world. Every time I heard an adventurer who went out and did it, whatever that was, whether it was paddling to Catalina on a paddleboard and running a marathon and then paddling back, or I'd interviewed a group of women that were moms and they skateboarded these like empty pools in these mansions that had been ravaged by fires, and they would like hop fences to do so. They were so gnarly. I'd never met a group of women, especially moms, who did this. But like hearing their stories gave me a little bit of courage to just be better myself and push harder and try new things and get out of my comfort zone. And so I wanted to share stories of people getting out of their comfort zone so other people could get out of their comfort zone. That's what has always made me happier, chasing fear head on. And everybody, the definition of adventure is pretty vast. Everybody has their own Everest to climb. So for some, it's breaking a bad habit, like giving up alcohol or cigarettes or drugs or whatever. Maybe for others, it's getting into shape. For others, it's climbing their local hill. For others, it's climbing Mount Everest, But I think we all have a different Everest to climb, so to speak. But when you do that, you're changed. So going back to Indo, after Indonesia, people don't like when I say Indo. Just trying to be sensitive to those who don't like the word Indo. So after Indonesia, there was this Shelby that had a lot more confidence, slight cockiness, I will say, a better tan, and I was fitter. And I just felt like if I could hang with 10 guys in Indonesia on this wild trip on a boat and surf waves that previously terrified me, then, maybe I could pitch this magazine that might reject me, or maybe I could ask this cute guy out that has not been returning my phone calls, or whatever it was,
Yeah. And did you feel that then when you were doing the podcast, you were you're just building up more and more confidence as it went on? And
the podcast was a few things. One, I just really wanted to do it. I wanted my own business. I didn't want to work for anybody else anymore. And I wanted to try it. And I knew that I could always go back and work for other people. And one thing I love about podcasting is I actually like working with a team. I was a soccer player and I played goalie. So when you're the goalie, you're like the weirdo on the team. You're all alone, but you have this team in front of you.
Yeah.
And I like that. So with my podcast, I have this team. So I have editors and producers. And now I've sold the podcast to REI and they've been awesome. And the goal was that I wanted to get this message to as many people as possible. I had no Instagram following at the time. And I was like, if I work with REI, they're reaching people that I want to reach. And they really helped me. Like they have a great team. But you asked me something and I just lost my train of thought. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no. So just with the podcast, like kind of how it developed, and then So when you sold it to REI, then were you still kind of you were then still involved with it completely, and obviously hosting and.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still involved. It's great. So I wanted the podcast to be a business, but I also wanted it to reach more people. Yep. And the other thing, I think this is what I forgot to tell you, was I have this perfectionist complex, and you can't see it in how I don't really brush my hair. I don't really care too much about, my clothes, but in my work and just what I do, I have this thing that it's probably learned. I'm not sure where it comes from, but I like things to be great. And when you're producing a podcast, you have to come out with a show every single week. And I knew I wouldn't have time to be a perfectionist because I was going to have to come up with content and material every single week. And it was going to be so fast that I didn't have time to get in my head and kind of mind fuck myself, so to speak, to be frank. And that was really helpful. I'm working on a writing project right now and my deadline is too big. And I'm like so filled with fear, and I've never done it. And it's not coming out that great right now, but you know, we learn as we go. And I've decided that I'm going to take Alex Honnold's advice, and I'm going to feel the pain from working really hard rather than sucking really hard right now. And maybe it'll be a little bit of both, but I'm going to choose to like move the lever to the side where I want to work hard rather than suck really hard, because it's the same pain, right? So I could like completely give up on the project and then I'm just sucking, or I could work really hard and at least I've learned something. I still have pain.
Is this for the book then? Is that sort of something that you're...
Yeah, but I don't even know now if the book, I probably shouldn't talk about it, but yes, that is for the book. Okay. I've been trying to write books for years, and if it happens this year, I'm stoked. If it doesn't happen, I don't know. I don't know what I'm going to do.
There's always another year, right?
There's always another year, but I'm trying really hard right now to make something happen. It's not a memoir.
And you've also got another podcast, which is Vitamin Joy podcast as well.
I love how like Euros say Vitamin Joy, Vitamin Joy. Yeah, you know, I've been really interested in health. Like I've mentioned, you know, I'm really interested in the impacts of nature and mental health and outdoors and mental health. But I'm also just interested in health and wellness. And I've struggled. I didn't realize I'd struggled with mental health, but I guess I had anxiety my whole life growing up and I didn't know it. And I've had, you know, depression runs really deep in my family. And there's been, you know, my grandpa died by suicide, and I've had a family member who had addiction. And there's a big list of isms in my family. One thing we do is we talk about it. We don't keep secrets. But I've also had I had an autoimmune condition where part of my skin was turning white. It's called vitiligo. It's actually something Michael Jackson had. I have it kind of on my hands right now. It was on my face. Now it's on my hands. And it's really hard because it's in front of me. Like some people have illnesses and they can't see them because they're internal. And I had this autoimmune thing happening. And I was like, I have to get really real about my health. And so I'm just interested in mental health and physical health. So I've tried everything. I've like fasted on water for 6 days straight. I've done all sorts of different diets. And so I'm interviewing people on different things like procrastination, giving up caffeine, fasting, vitamins. I talk to people about mental health, about trauma, all sorts of things. And I think in doing that podcast, one of the things I've learned, and that's kind of the podcast premise, is joy is huge. And like joy is also medicine. And every culture has joy as part of their remedies. And, you know, we all learned in the last couple of years that like not having joy leads to all sorts of other types of problems. We've all experienced some suffering during the COVID-19 pandemic. And so I'm really interested in how can we dose ourselves with like a little joy and a little nature every day, just to be healthier, happier, and just more contributing to society. And one of the things that I'm guilty of is I think I was a little addicted to being busy for a really long time. And that's sort of a socially accepted addiction. And I worked really hard, and
it's almost glamorized, right? I mean, it's
and it's something that's really, really runs high in my family. I love my family to death, but so I've had these jaunts where I've like lived in Costa Rica and taught surfing, and it wasn't that busy. And I've seen how the Costa Ricans do it. And then I lived for 6 months in New Zealand for 2 years in a row. And I watched how the New Zealanders do life. And I've always appreciated sort of their culture as well. They also have humor, which I thought would be a really big part of Vitamin Joy. Like when I set out to do the podcast, I wanted to talk about health and wellness with humor, because I felt like we were missing that, especially in America, North America and the United States. And so, you know, one of the things that's so great about New Zealand culture is they're so funny, but they're polite. And they really respect their land. And I just was like, these guys totally have it figured out. And it was really fun living there for 6 months. We lived in Raglan, which has one of the best lefts in the world.
Yeah, it's good, huh?
And everybody has a garden, and we ate really good food, and the people were just really funny. And I'm sure they didn't know what to do with us, because I'm sure like a couple of the women saw me as like the most cocky person ever. But it's like, I was like, in America, if you don't talk about yourself, like my job, I also have to promote myself, right? I can't make money to have health insurance. Like that concept to them was totally crazy. So they're like, Shelby, you need to learn humility. And I'm like, if you're not, I was like, you can't be humble in my position. It was really interesting to talk to them about that.
And do you reckon sort of that, like living in these different places, that sort of, I don't know, is it kind of giving you the itch of like, then you want to kind of
now live go to Portugal?
Come over to Portugal. No, but like, yeah, because we've done the same. So I've like sort of lived in the Canary Islands, lived in Australia.
Wow, you're so
Portugal,
cool.
Kind of, yeah. I don't know. You always think like if there's a couple of years and then you kind of get that itch again. But like now, like we're probably truly happy. I mean, it's kind of it's a slower pace of life to living in London, that's for sure. But it's great surf, and yeah, it's kind of.
I mean, I've learned a couple things in travel. One, every place will teach you something, but you also take yourself wherever you go. So like happiness is an inside job. I used to think like, oh, I'll be happy if I live here. I'll be happy if I live here. But happiness is an inside job. You got to be happy with where you are, wherever you are.
Yeah.
That being said, like I have a friend who went and moved on his boat in Tahiti, and he's like much happier there than he was in San Diego. He's able to do things that he wasn't able to do here. And so I think it depends on the person. I think if you can live abroad for at least a year or 6 months, you should. If you get the opportunity, do it.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I agree. What else are you working on? Like anything else coming up sort of later this year, or?
I've been really into, I put a pause on Vitamin Joy for a little bit to work on this project, to see if I can make it happen. If I can't, then I'm going to try. I've been rock climbing for the first time in years in a bouldering gym inside. I mean, just because of COVID, and it's been awesome. I like the challenge of rock climbing. It's something really satisfying about getting to the top of a complicated route every time. It just, that also rewires your brain. And it's also a cool sport because it uses your proprioception. You're scared the whole time. It's physical, it's social. It's a bit of a math problem or an engineering problem at times. So it's using my brain in a different way. And I've been spending a lot of time with family. My mom, my sister, and I have 2 nephews and a niece moved to San Diego during the pandemic. And it's been awesome. It's been kind of challenging, but it's also been so beautiful having them here because kids are awesome. And it's been really nice. I've taken all my niece and my nephews surfing, and they love it. And I also have a 14-year-old nephew who lives in Los Angeles, and he's been coming down, and he tried surfing for the first time during the pandemic, and it totally changed his life. And now he's like a surfer. And it's just really cool. Nobody in my family had ever surfed. I was the only one out of 3 girls. My parents, thought it was kind of crazy. And so it's nice to have this young generation surf with me, and they just say really funny things, and they're wise, and they're also, they throw their tantrums. But we don't have kids, my partner and I, so it's great to be available in my niece and nephew's lives.
Yeah. Yeah, nice. And what's the best way if people kind of want to follow what you're up to and, find out about the projects, like, when it does sort of happen, and what's the best way to kind of...
I think the best way is, I'm a little off Instagram these days, but I'm at Shelby Stanger, and every now and then I like chime back in with kind of what random weird things I'm up to, whether I'm hiking in the Sierras or taking my mom to or she's taking me to an ice bath class. That's actually something I got into last year, was breath work and ice baths. And like I said, I'd done a story about Wim Hof, the Iceman, years ago. But there's a guy named Reese Peluso in San Diego who teaches it here, and I love his class. And he's just so great. And it's really been helpful. But breath work is free. I mean, you don't need anything. And ice baths, you can pretty much make very affordable. You can just throw ice in your bathtub, or if you live somewhere cold, you can jump in the ocean or a lake. But I found that the healing effects of those things have been amazing. Same with saunas. Like if you can get to a sauna, those are also awesome. There's a lot of science out there. So you can follow my podcast. I think that's probably the easiest way. Wild Ideas Worth Living and Vitamin Joy are both available anywhere you listen to podcasts. I'm on Instagram. If you go to my website, shelbystanger.com, I have a newsletter. I don't send out many newsletters. So when I do, I try to make them impactful. For people who want to take a podcast class, I have a class available, I think, until October. And we can try to give your listeners some sort of like special discount. Maybe, I think the code is Friend of Shelby. Try it. And if that works, it's half off. try it. I don't know, but I think that's it. If not, I'll have someone make the code. And yeah, I mean, I'm just trying to like finish these projects, and I'm open to what is next, but I'm pretty sure that I'm just going to go full throttle into these podcasts next year and keep telling stories of people who are living out their wildest idea in hopes that others will get the courage to do the same.
Nice. Cool. Well, thanks, Shelby. It's been awesome chatting to you and hearing all your stories. And yeah, we'll definitely be keeping an eye out and listening in and finding out what you're up to.
Awesome. Well, Ollie, thank you so much for having me. I'm so glad I got to meet you. I didn't even know your whole deal existed. So now I can tell people about you. Maybe we can host a field TV show together one day. My dream of TV could come back.